Welcome back to the painting coach, and in this video I'm going to show you how to paint any zombie you come across. Unless it's a real zombie, in which case don't waft at it with a brush, probably run away. Now don't worry, we're going to use a lot of colours, but that's just to give you options. You don't have to use them all. If this is your first time on the channel and you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing and hit that bell so you know when all my latest videos are released. Alright, so here are our willing victims. We've got 3 zombies we're going to paint on the video today, and I'm going to talk you through all the different techniques. So in terms of how I've primed them black underneath and I've sprayed them white over the top, and that's to make it easier. So what we're going to do is use contrast paints for all the organic elements, and then we'll just go back to normal paints then for some of the non-organics, like the things like gravestones and the clothing and the rope, etc. So we're going to start with the lightest colour first, and that's going to be the skin. So I've taken some Plaguebearer Flesh, some Guilliman Flesh and some Space Wolves Grey, and I've mixed that 1-to-1 with contrast medium. So what we're going to do then is we're going to start painting, and I'm going to use one on each. So start off with the Guilliman Flesh, and you can see it's really thin. It just works its way into those recesses. Now the reason we're going for contrast paint on the flesh is because that's where it kind of lends itself best. And the reason we're painting the light colours first is that it's much easier to go back in with a dark colour afterwards, because it'll cover over the lighter colour. A little bit like, painting normally, but more so important when we've got the contrast paints. And you can see it's really, really thin, whichever colour you're using. And that's really important because it's just going to go into those recesses and it'll leave some areas, and it'll be really easy to kind of mess it up a little bit and make it kind of look a bit more zombified later. Just going to focus on one zombie for now as we work our way through, and you'll see the other two come back in. But what we're going to do now is the lighter kind of wood. So the colour for that I'm going to use is Aggaros Dunes. So you can see these guys have got some stakes through them. So we're just going to paint the stakes and any other lighter wood with Aggaros Dunes. This guy looks like he's got a wooden tombstone as well, but we'll do that in a darker wood. So we let this dry. Any other lighter wood you've got. And then we'll come back and we'll move on, and we'll do some of these some of the grass first, and then the kind of the roots and things that he's got growing through him. So I'm swapping the zombies as we go on the through these. So I'm using Militarum Green now, and this is to catch the kind of sprouts of grass. Don't worry if you get them on some of the bits that we're going to paint with darker wood later. If they've got any growth growing through them, then you can just, add a little bit of green to the end. Apologies if you can hear my dog barking in the background. So work around all the models like that. Like I said, I'm using the Cursed City models. Yours may not have bits growing out of them. They could be Mantic zombies, they could be Walking Dead, anything like that. So just work your way around until you're happy, and then we'll come back and move on to the darker brown next. So I find one of the easiest ways to do things like flowers like this is just take some Carroubourg Crimson, and you can just paint it over the kind of the white there, and you can see straight away you've got a kind of nice pinky kind of colour, which works nicely for things like roses. So it's working again. It doesn't matter if you go over the bits that we're going to paint darker later on. It's no problem at all. And the other thing we can start to look to do once we've got this Carroubourg Crimson out is we can have a look at some of the flesh, and we can make sure you don't have too much on your brush, but we can start to drop it into some of these kind of areas where we've got chipped we've got ripped flesh and exposed bone, and you can see there it works, works quite nicely in terms of going over some of these areas, because essentially these guys are dead, so we don't want them to look alive. We don't want this to be thing. We just want it to be like where the blood perhaps has stained the model, as opposed to where it's kind of actually alive. So just work your way around all the zombies, doing that. Again, you can use as little or as much as you want, and then we'll come back and we'll do the darker wood next. So we've got some really nice colours coming through now, which is good to see. So what I'm going to do now is take some Wyldwood, and I'm going to use this to paint all of the darker wood and any earth around any of the zombies. So this is really straightforward, just adding it on and being careful around those lighter colours. And this is why we did the lighter colour first, because this will cover over any lighter colours quite easily. So work your way around. I'm going to paint this one's gravestone as well with this, because we can always go back and make sure we just add a thin layer on so that it doesn't overpower, or gets a little bit of differentiation between the other wood that we've painted. So get that done, and then when we come back, we'll I think we're done with contrast. We'll have a little look at where we are, and then we'll move on to getting the clothing and all the kind of little trinkets and things done. One last thing I did want to do with contrast, I did want to do the hair on this model, and I'm just going to do this black hair, so I'm going to use some black Templar contrast paint. Just work this through nice and simple like that, being really careful now when I come against those areas I've already finished. So just paint that in, keep it thin, because like you see, you already get that highlight. Now if you've got zombies, you're probably painting a lot of them, so we want to do them quickly, and that's why I'm using these contrast paints, and hopefully you can see that it's coming together quite quickly. So what I'll do is I'll finish this off, do any other hair in any other colour you want, and then what we'll do is we'll come back and we'll have a look, kind of like see where we're at before we go on to the normal layer paints. So moving across to the layer paints, first thing I want to do, I'm going to do these gravestones. And I'm going to use Mechanicus Standard Grey to base them all up. Just work it into the recesses there. One coat of this should be enough. It doesn't matter if it's not a cohesive coat. So if you have some streaks, that's absolutely fine, because this is essentially stonework, so you're not going to have a uniform colour on there. So just work that all the way around. And the other thing I'm going to do as well is I think I'm going to paint this guy's pants. So make sure I'm in focus, and again, just paint the guy's pants, being careful not to cover anything you've already finished. And then when we come back, we'll have a look at shading and highlighting. Next thing we're going to do is just shade down that Mechanicus Standard Grey a bit with some Nuln Oil. Again, not letting it pool too heavily, just working it into those recesses so you get some definition. Be really careful about those areas you've already finished, and we don't want to go over any candles or anything like that. So get that done, let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll highlight it all up, and then we'll get onto some more of the clothing. If you've done some pants in that colour as well, don't forget to shade those down with Nuln Oil as well. So any grey that we've got that we want to highlight, the colour we're going to use is Dawnstone. Make sure you don't have too much on your brush, and this is just going to be like a rough highlight. So just catching the kind of the raised edges as best we can, where we've got the indentations, where we've got cracked stone, kind of the raised areas as well, and those letters. So you can see I'm just doing this fairly quickly. Where I can catch edges I am. This is just giving it a rough highlight in there like that. And then if you've painted someone's pants, for example, in grey, just make sure we've got a bit of focus on there. Just want to paint all of the pants, the majority of the pants with this. And if you need to put a second coverage on, you can, but just be really rough with it, because we're going to soil it later anyway, so nothing on these is going to be pristine. We're just building up layers of opportunity to create some really cool effects on these zombies. So get that done, and then we'll put one more highlight on. And just to finish off the grey, we're just going to use a little bit of Administratum Grey just to kind of sharpen and catch the most raised edges that are going to catch the light. Make sure you've got a good point on your brush. My point's just gone, so I just need to be really careful and just twist it on the palette to get it back. So there we are. Work your way around and get that done until you're happy with it, and then we'll come on and we'll move on to do some more clothing next. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at painting a more saturated colour now. So we're going to go for a red dress on this zombie. So just using Khorne Red, I'm just going to paint this all over the clothing, being really careful around the bits I've already finished. You may need a couple of coats to have this cover properly, but to be honest, as long as it's red-ish, I think that's okay. If it's really thin, then go over it again, but I'm not really looking for a massively even coat. It's not the most important thing when it comes to this. You know, you can use contrast paint if you want to get your zombies done and on the table really quickly. I just want to kind of do this just to give a little bit of a different style to all the organic stuff we've done. So get that done, and any other clothing you want to do red, and then we'll come back and we'll shade and highlight. Next we're going to shade that dress back to some Nuln Oil and just work it into all those recesses. We don't want it to pool anywhere, but again, don't worry too much if it looks a little streaky, because that just all adds to the effect. Obviously be careful as you come towards those parts you've already finished, like the skin and things like that. So get that done, let it dry, and then we'll come back, we'll highlight it next, and then we'll have a look at the last bit of clothing before we go on to the kind of accessories like the candles and the metallics, and then we'll dirty up these zombies. When that Nuln Oil is dry, or even when it's not, as in some places of mine, jump back to that the red, Khorne Red, couldn't think what colour it was, and just roughly highlight it into some of these areas, leaving the kind of the Nuln Oil in the recesses. So there's nothing tidy about this. I'm just literally just stabbing at areas of the model, just catching those raised creases and folds. So get that done, and we'll come back and we'll have a little look at just adding another sharp highlight to it next. Just to finish up some of that red highlight, just going to take some Wazdakka Red, and I'm going to stipple it along kind of some of these raised areas. Again, like I said, we're going to dirty and mess up a little bit later, so I'm not concerned about how tidy I'm being at all. Just want to be careful around those areas we've already finished. So work your way around, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to do another colour on some of the other clothing that we've got. So to get a nice contrasting colour to all the kind of natural colours we've got here, let's go for something like a blue. And I'm using Kantor Blue for this. So exactly like I did with the other models, I'm just going to base all over and Kantor Blue over some of those white areas. You can see it doesn't cover that well. That's fine. Just give it a decent coating. Don't worry about it being a full coat, because we're going to shade it and we're going to highlight it as well. And you know, ultimately these are not pristine clothes, are they? They've been underground for a while, they're ripped, they're torn, they're raggedy. So get that done. Careful around those other areas you already finished, and then when we come back we'll shade it and highlight it. So just like we did with that red, we're going to shade this with Nuln Oil, being careful when we're around other areas. I'm looking at the belts as well and kind of straps, and I think, do you know what, just to keep the paints down, I'm going to go back to some contrast for that. So but we'll do that after we finish this bit of clothing now, before we do the candles and the other bits of trinkets that we've got. So get that covered, be careful around the bits you haven't finished, and then we'll come back and highlight it next. So just like we did with the red dress, we're going to go back to the Kantor Blue, just get a good point on the brush, and I'm going to roughly highlight those kind of raised areas, or the bits we can really see. So nice and easy doing that. Again, being very rough, you can see the wash isn't even dry in some places. I don't mind if it mixes together, so let that dry and then we'll highlight it next. Now the highlight, as you can see it on the palette, is Hoeth Blue, which is a lot lighter than the Kantor Blue. And again, this is just skipping kind of colours to get that highlight on. So I'm just kind of roughly stippling this highlight along some of these kind of raised edges a bit. So I need to give my brush a good clean, and a soap and a shampoo and a conditioner just to get those bristles back in place. But you can see there really quickly, that's done. So I think what I'll do now, we'll do the leather belts next, because there's a few of them on the model, so hopefully you've still kept them that colour. If not, just give them a once over with like a white or a bone colour. We'll do those next. And the colour I'm going to use for any of the straps is Snakebite Leather contrast paint, which is a classic colour. It goes on really nicely and gives you just that light brown. And again, we're going to dirty all these up before we call them done anyway, so don't worry too much if it's a bit bright. But just work your way around, get that done in all those little awkward places, and then we'll come back and we'll have a look at the candles next. For the candles, again, we're minimising the kind of colours we use, but I'm going to do Ushabti Bone. And this goes for any parchment or paper or any notices that you can see as well. So just going to work this over. Now, it's not going to cover over anything that's kind of really dark in one coat, so you just have to keep working at it. But for our purposes, that one coat there is fine. So go around any bits, like any bits of paper, any candles, get them coloured in like that, and then we'll shade them next. Then we'll come back and highlight them. Shading those candles, just use, well, I'm going to use Seraphim Sepia, but any kind of sepia wash will do. And you just work it on there. Make sure it gets into those recesses and gives them that kind of shade there. And then that's the same for all the models. And then if you've got that parchment, you can paint that as well. Let it dry and we'll come back and highlight it. Once that sepia wash is dry, you can just go back to that Ushabti Bone and then look to highlight the kind of candles. And again, I'm just kind of using stippling on it. And if you want to do more of a highlight on it, if you want to go lighter, then you can do. I'm just going to catch some of that wood there. But I don't think you need to. I think that's okay like that. So work your way around everything, get that highlighted, and then we're going to come back. We'll drop onto the metallics, and then we're pretty much done. We've just got a little bit of messing up to do. In terms of basing the metallics, we're not going to do too much messing about. We're just going to base them with some Iron Warriors, just to give it that kind of dark iron feel to them. So I'm just quickly going over here now. We've got lots of little locks. We've got something nailed through there. And I'm sure this one in particular has got his coffin on there as well. So work your way around and get it all covered with the Iron Warriors. And then we'll come back and highlight it. And then we'll add a little bit of rust. And then we're pretty much done with the models. Then we're looking at how we make them a little bit more defined. And how we make them a little bit more zombified. And then we'll do the bases last. So if you want to, you can add a little bit of a highlight to that metal. So I'm using chrome. Again, like I say, you don't have to. And I'm looking to just, stipple this highlight on as well. Nothing is smooth on these. It's all just very rough. And that's by design. So get that done, work your way around. And then when you're happy with how that's turned out, we'll come back and we'll put some rust into it. Adding some rust in is really easy. Just take some Skrag Brown, really thin it down, and then just paint it into any recesses. And then as that kind of dries, you'll get the effect you want, nice and simple. So get that done. We'll come back, dirty it all up, and then we're pretty much done. The first thing we want to do is we want to just darken up and add some definition to some of the skin tone. We're going to use some Athonian Camoshade for that. Now, I've not got very much on my brush at all, but I'm just basically kind of glazing into the joints and where the muscles under the feet, and especially towards the lower parts of the body. So just work that around, because this is the kind of the decay setting in there. And then you around the face as well, around the eyes, the nose and the mouth, where anything kind of interacts with the body and creates maybe a shadow, you can put some of this in there. So like I said, I'm doing it very lightly. So do this over all your models. It's easier to add a little and then go back in and add more if you need it. So like I said, I'm just moving paint around. You can see the constant movement of the model on my Red Grass Games paint holder there. Nice little plug for them. So get that done over all of them, and then we'll come back in and we'll just add some soiling, for want of a better term, to the models, and then we're done. The last thing we're going to do on this is we're going to just messy them all up, and the colour we're going to use for this is Typhus Corrosion, straight out of the pot. And what we're looking to do is look to paint this around things like the feet, just like that, and also the kind of the clothing and the lower bits of that as well. Then clean your brush off. It's important to use either a synthetic brush or an old brush, and then just use that water that's on that brush just to clean off a lot of it, so you kind of get that really grimy, dirty look that these guys are dragging themselves through the field as well. So do this across all the models. Don't be afraid, you can always take it off. Just make sure you put a good chunk of it on and then wipe it off. Let that dry, base it to match the rest of your army, and we'll have a look at them on the turntable next. So there we have it, some zombies painted in absolutely no time at all. I really hope you've enjoyed the video and taken some ideas away for your own shambling horde. If you have, please leave a like and a comment down below. It really does help me make sure that I'm producing the kind of content that you want to see. If you'd like to support me and the channel, you can do so using the links in the description. There's the link to my Patreon where you get exclusive access to me via my Discord group, a live monthly frequently asked questions video, as well as a little bit of additional content that I don't have on YouTube. There's also the link for Goblin Gaming where you can get up to 20% of all your wargaming needs, not just Warhammer. And there's also my Amazon links where you can find out some of my recommended equipment. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time.